Careful what you pretend to be because you are what you pretend to be, said Kurt Vonnegut. A strange thought, right? But think about it, how much of your life is spent playing a role? Pretending to care when you don't, pretending to not care when you do. And let's be honest, what's more powerful than pretending to be the center of the world even for a moment? But here's the catch. Is it really pretend if that's what you secretly crave? You love being the center of attention. There, I said it. Before you rush to deny it, before you mutter, "Not me, I'm not like that," pause. Ask yourself, why does the idea of craving attention feel so shameful? Because someone told you it's selfish? Because they made you believe that being noticed is for egotists, not for the humble and virtuous? Let me break it to you gently, that's nonsense. The real problem isn't wanting to be the center of attention. The real problem is why you want it, and what you're willing to trade to get it. Human beings, as Aristotle so wisely observed, are social animals. Connection is our lifeblood, and to be noticed is to feel that connection, to feel seen, valued, and, in a sense, alive. But there's a shadow side to this truth, isn't there? This deep craving to be acknowledged can become a trap, a hunger that grows insatiable. And here's the kicker. The more desperately you chase attention, the harder it becomes to truly receive it. Why? Because the game you're playing is rigged. Let me explain. Imagine a world where every action you take is fueled by the need to be seen. You dress a certain way, speak a certain way, act a certain way, all in the hopes that someone, anyone, will notice you. For a moment they do. Their eyes light up, their head tilts in your direction, and you feel it. That intoxicating rush of validation. But it doesn't last, does it? The moment they look away, it's gone. And you're left with that gnawing emptiness, craving the next hit of attention like a junkie looking for their fix. This cycle is exhausting, isn't it? Yet it feels impossible to break because attention, in its purest form, is survival. Think back to the moment you were born. The first thing you did was cry out for someone to notice you, to acknowledge your existence. That cry wasn't selfish, it was instinctual. To be ignored is to be forgotten, and to be forgotten is to cease to exist. That's the primal fear you're up against, the fear of vanishing into nothingness. But here's the thing, attention is not inherently bad. In fact, it's essential. Every human achievement, every great work of art, every scientific breakthrough began because someone wanted to be seen. The problem arises when you mistake attention for worth. When you believe that without someone else's gaze, you have no value. That belief? That's the lie. And it's killing you. Let's break it down. Picture a star burning in the vastness of space. It shines, radiates, and sends its light out into the universe. Most of that light will never be seen by human eyes. It will travel for millennia, unnoticed, unappreciated. But the star doesn't stop burning because no one is watching. Its purpose isn't tied to the gaze of an observer. It burns because that's its nature. Now compare that to yourself. Are you burning brightly because it's who you are, or are you dimming and flaring, desperately trying to be noticed? Here's a thought experiment for you. Imagine you walk into a room full of people. Some faces turn toward you, others don't. How do you feel? Do you feel relief, confidence, ease? Or do you feel that sudden, overwhelming need to prove yourself? To do or say something that makes everyone stop and notice you? Now flip the script. Picture walking into that same room with an unshakable certainty that your worth isn't tied to their gaze. Imagine knowing, truly knowing, that you don't need their attention to matter. How different would your experience of that room be? You see, the desire for attention is deeply human, but it's also deeply misunderstood. We've been taught to see it as a sign of vanity, a weakness. But attention, at its core, is just another form of connection. It's not the attention itself that's the problem, it's what you believe it will give you. Most people aren't craving attention because they're selfish. They're craving attention because they're lonely, because they feel invisible, because they believe that without someone else's validation, they don't exist. Now let's complicate things a little. Think about the people who seem to have it all, the celebrities, the influencers, the public figures drowning in attention. Why are so many of them miserable? Why do we hear countless stories of fame leading to isolation, addiction, even despair? It's because they've discovered a brutal truth. Attention is hollow when it isn't earned through authenticity. When people are looking at you but not seeing you, the loneliness becomes unbearable. And yet, there's another side to this story. The side where attention can be transformative. Where it can be the spark that ignites revolutions, movements, and relationships. But for that to happen, you have to stop chasing attention for its own sake. You have to let go of the idea that your worth depends on how many eyes are on you. Because the truth is, attention is a mirror. It reflects back to you what you believe about yourself. If you believe you're not enough, no amount of attention will ever be satisfying. So here's the real question. What are you burning for? Is your light fueled by the need to be seen, or by the desire to create something meaningful? Are you chasing attention to fill a void, or are you using it as a tool to connect, to inspire, to grow? The answers to those questions will define your relationship with attention, and ultimately with yourself. The nature of attention is paradoxical. It can be the thing that saves you or the thing that destroys you. It all depends on how you wield it. But one thing is certain, you can't escape it. Attention is wired into your DNA. It's what connects you to the world, to others, and to yourself. The key is to understand it, to master it, and to use it wisely. Remember this, you don't burn for their gaze. You burn because you exist. And the brighter you shine from within, the less you'll need anyone else to notice. The less you'll crave the fleeting glow of their spotlight, and the more you'll create a light so brilliant that it transforms everything it touches. So, why do you want to be the center of attention? And more importantly, who are you when no one's watching? Answer that, and you'll begin to unravel the truth about your deepest desires. Attention is seductive, isn't it? The way it pulls at you, whispers promises of fulfillment and meaning, lures you into thinking, if only they would notice me, then I'd be enough. But let's get real, is that ever actually true? Does the applause fill the emptiness? Or does it simply distract you from it for a fleeting moment? Nietzsche, in his critique of modern humanity, warned of the last man, a creature consumed by comfort, validation, and the avoidance of anything too real, too difficult, or too profound. When you chase attention for the sake of validation, you're walking a dangerous path, one that doesn't lead to freedom or fulfillment, but to dependence and despair. Let's dissect this. When you seek validation, you're essentially outsourcing your self-worth. You're saying, I'll only matter if someone else decides I do. That's a risky gamble because it hands over control of your value to external forces. Forces that are fickle, fleeting, and often superficial. How many likes did you get? How many compliments? How many people noticed you in that meeting? The metrics are endless, exhausting, and worst of all, meaningless. Because even when you win, the prize is hollow. The likes come and go, the applause fades, and the compliments are forgotten. And then what? You're left standing there, desperate for the next fix. Here's a cruel truth. The world is an unreliable source of validation. It's like drinking salt water when you're thirsty. The more you consume, the thirstier you become. It's not because the attention is bad, it's because you're asking it to do something it was never designed to do. Attention cannot fill the void inside you. It can't heal the wounds of rejection, neglect, or insecurity. It can't give you a sense of purpose. All it can do is reflect back the version of yourself you've decided to present. And let's be honest, how often is that version the real you? Think about it. How many times have you altered your behavior, your appearance, or your opinions just to fit in? To be liked? To be seen? And what did it cost you? Every time you put on a mask to win someone else's approval, you chip away at your authenticity. You lose touch with who you really are. And here's the irony, the more you try to be what others want, the less connected you feel to yourself, and to them. It's a vicious cycle. You crave attention because you feel disconnected, but the more you chase it, the more disconnected you become. There's another layer to this trap though. Validation isn't just about approval, it's about control. When you rely on others to affirm your worth, you give them power over you. Think about that for a moment. Every time you let someone else's opinion determine your value, you hand them the keys to your self-esteem. They get to decide if you're good enough, smart enough, attractive enough. It's like building a house on quicksand, unstable, unpredictable, and ultimately doomed to collapse. But here's the paradox. The more you depend on validation, the more vulnerable you become to criticism. A single negative comment can shatter you. What? Because when your self-worth is tied to external approval, every critique feels like a personal attack. It's not just someone disagreeing with you, it's someone threatening the fragile foundation of your identity. And that's exhausting, isn't it? Living in constant fear of being judged, rejected, or dismissed. But what's the alternative? If you stop seeking validation, will you disappear? Will you lose your place in the world? The answer is no. In fact, it's the opposite. When you let go of the need for validation, you gain something far more valuable. Freedom. Freedom to be yourself. Freedom to explore, experiment, and evolve without the fear of judgment. Freedom to live authentically, not as a performance but as a genuine expression of who you are. Here's a mental exercise. Imagine a world where no one's opinion of you matters. No applause, no criticism, no external validation of any kind. Who would you be? How would you act? What would you create if the only approval you needed was your own? It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? because it forces you to confront the reality of your own insecurities. But it's also liberating, because it means you can stop chasing the impossible and start focusing on what truly matters. And let's be clear, this isn't about rejecting attention or validation entirely. It's about understanding their place in your life. Validation can be a wonderful thing when it's earned authentically, when it's a byproduct of living your truth, not a substitute for it. Attention can be empowering when it's used to share your gifts, your passions, and your purpose with the world. But when they become your goal, your addiction, they lose their value. They become chains, not wings. The trap of validation is real, but it's not inescapable. The first step is recognizing it for what it is, a psychological crutch, a way of avoiding the hard work of self-acceptance. And here's the harsh reality. No amount of external validation will ever be enough if you don't validate yourself. You'll always be chasing, always be yearning, always be falling short. But when you turn inward, when you start to build a sense of worth that's independent of other people's opinions, everything changes. This isn't easy. It requires brutal honesty, deep introspection, and a willingness to face your fears. But it's worth it, because the alternative is living a life dictated by the whims of others. A life where you're never truly free, never truly yourself. And isn't that the greatest tragedy of all? To spend your life performing for an audience that may never truly see you? So here's the challenge. Stop asking, what do they think of me? And start asking, what do I think of myself? Stop measuring your worth by their applause and start measuring it by your own values, your own growth, your own truth. Because at the end of the day, the only validation that matters is the one you give yourself. And once you find it, you'll realize that the trap of seeking validation was never about them. It was always about you. So here we are. You've recognized the cycle, the trap, the gnawing hunger for validation that leaves you hollow. But what now? How do you take something as primal, as deeply human as the need for attention, and transform it into something meaningful? How do you shift from being a prisoner of other people's opinions to becoming the master of your own worth? The answer lies not in denying your desire for attention, but in redefining it. Let's break this down. First, let's confront a hard truth. The attention you seek is not inherently about others. It's about you. It's about the story you're telling yourself. When you crave someone's gaze, what you're really craving is permission. Permission to feel worthy, to feel seen, to feel like you matter. And that's the problem. By seeking attention, you're outsourcing the most intimate responsibility of your life, the responsibility to validate yourself. You're letting strangers, friends, even algorithms decide your value. Doesn't that seem backward? Marcus Aurelius, one of history's greatest Stoic philosophers, wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." Sit with that for a moment. How often do you betray yourself just to win a fleeting glance of approval? How often do you shrink, perform, or distort your truth to fit into someone else's expectations? More importantly, why? Let's dig deeper. The craving for attention isn't the enemy, it's a signal. A lighthouse in the fog pointing you toward what you truly desire: connection, purpose, recognition, love. The issue arises when you confuse the means with the end. Attention by itself is empty. It's a spotlight with nothing on the stage. What you put in that spotlight, that's what matters. So what's on your stage? Is it your true self or a carefully crafted character? Are you showing the world your essence, or just the parts you think they'll applaud? Here's where the transformation begins. Instead of chasing attention, shift your focus to creating something worthy of attention. Notice the difference. Chasing is desperate, exhausting, reactive. Creating, on the other hand, is empowering. When you create, whether it's art, ideas, relationships, or even moments of kindness, you're no longer a passive recipient of validation. You're an active participant in your own value. You're building something real, something that lasts, something that reflects who you are. Think of it this way. A flower doesn't bloom to impress the bees. It blooms because blooming is its nature. The bees come because the flower is fulfilling its purpose. The same principle applies to you. When you align with your purpose, your unique talents, passions, and truths, attention becomes a byproduct, not the goal. People are drawn to authenticity, to those who shine without trying, to those who don't need attention but command it naturally. But let's not oversimplify this. Aligning with your purpose is easier said than done. It requires introspection, vulnerability, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths about yourself. Who are you when no one's watching? What do you value independent of other people's opinions? What drives you, not to impress but to express? These are hard questions, but they're also liberating. Because once you answer them, You'll realize that your worth has nothing to do with the number of eyes on you and everything to do with the light inside you. Here's a practical exercise. The next time you feel the urge to seek attention, pause. Instead of asking, "How can I get noticed?" ask, "What do I want to offer?" Shift from a mindset of scarcity, where attention is something you have to grasp, to a mindset of abundance, where attention is something you attract by adding value. Whether it's through your work, your relationships, or even your presence, focus on what you're giving, not what you're getting. You'll be amazed at how this simple shift changes everything. And here's the paradox. The less you need attention, the more you'll receive it. Why? Because people are drawn to those who don't depend on them for validation. They're inspired by those who are self-assured, who radiate confidence and authenticity. Think about the people you admire most. Are they the ones clamoring for approval, or the ones quietly, boldly living their truth? You already know the answer. Now let's address the fear. Letting go of the need for attention feels risky, doesn't it? Like stepping into a void where no one's watching, no one's listening, no one cares. But that void isn't empty, it's full of possibility. It's where you find yourself, free from the noise of other people's opinions. It's where you discover that your value isn't tied to their gaze, but to your own reflection. Nietzsche once said, "Become who you are. Not who they want you to be, not who you think you should be, but who you already are at your core." That's the key to transforming your relationship with attention. It's not about rejecting it, it's about reclaiming it. Using it not as a measure of your worth, but as a tool to share your unique gifts with the world. Let me leave you with a metaphor. Attention is like fire. In the wrong hands, it can destroy, burning through your identity, your relationships, your sense of self. But in the right hands, it can illuminate. It can light the way for others, spark new ideas, create warmth and connection. The question is, how will you use it? Will you let it consume you, or will you learn to control it, to shape it, to make it work for you instead of against you? This is your turning point. Attention doesn't have to be a prison. It can be a bridge, a way to connect, to inspire, to leave a mark. But only if you stop chasing it and start creating something worth looking at. So ask yourself, what's on your stage? What are you burning for? And most importantly, who are you when no one's watching? The answers will set you free. Imagine this. A fire burns brightly in a distant forest. It doesn't care if anyone sees it. It doesn't beg for witnesses or applause. It burns because that's what it was meant to do, because its heat and light are essential to its nature. Now, imagine you could live like that, not for the eyes of others, not for the fleeting approval of the crowd, but for the purpose that sets your soul on fire. What would change in your life if you stopped chasing the spotlight and started creating your own light? Here's the truth. The spotlight is seductive, but it's also dangerous. When your worth is tied to the gaze of others, you're at the mercy of their whims. Today they're cheering. Tomorrow they might be silent, or worse, they might turn on you. The applause fades, the crowd disperses, and you're left in the dark, wondering who you are without their attention. But here's the secret. You're not the light because they see you. You're the light because you choose to shine. Let's talk about the power of intrinsic value. External validation is fleeting, but intrinsic value is eternal. It's the difference between building a sandcastle on the shore and carving a mountain into stone. The waves of public opinion will come and go, eroding whatever is built on shallow foundations. But when you create meaning from within, when your actions, your purpose, your identity are rooted in something deeper, no wave can wash it away. So the question is, are you building castles or mountains? Plato's allegory of the cave offers a profound metaphor for this transformation. Most people, Plato suggests, live their lives in shadows, mistaking illusions for reality. They see only the flickering images on the cave wall, cast by the light of a fire they cannot see. The spotlight is one of those shadows, a projection, not the source. To leave the cave, to step into the light, you must stop chasing shadows and start seeking truth. But truth requires courage. It demands that you face yourself, stripped of pretense and performance, and ask, who am I really? This isn't just a philosophical exercise, it's deeply practical. When you stop performing for others and start living for yourself, everything changes. Your relationships become more authentic because you're no longer trying to impress or manipulate. Your work becomes more meaningful because it's driven by passion, not approval. Even your failures feel different, not as humiliations to be hidden, but as lessons to be embraced. When you live for yourself, you're no longer afraid of rejection because your worth isn't up for debate. But let's not romanticize this transformation. It's hard. Letting go of the need for attention feels like walking into a void. The silence can be deafening. The space where the applause used to be can feel unbearably empty. But it's in that emptiness that you find possibility. It's in that silence that you hear your own voice, often for the first time. And when you hear it, you realize how much noise you've been drowning in all along. There's also a paradox here. When you stop needing attention, you become magnetic. People are drawn to authenticity, to those who burn with a light that isn't dependent on external fuel. Think about the people you admire. Are they the ones clamoring for validation or the ones quietly, confidently doing their thing? True charisma isn't about being the loudest or the brightest. It's about being the most real. And when you live authentically, attention becomes a byproduct, not the goal. It comes naturally, without chasing, without effort. Let's ground this in action. How do you create meaning beyond the spotlight? First, redefine success. Instead of measuring it by how many people notice you, measure it by how deeply you impact those who do. You don't need millions of followers to make a difference. A single connection, a single moment of truth, can be far more powerful than the hollow roar of a crowd. Quality over quantity. Depth over breadth. Second, focus on what you're giving, not what you're getting. Attention is a transaction, but meaning is a gift. When you approach your work, your relationships, your life with the mindset of a giver, you stop needing the spotlight to feel fulfilled. Think about the artists, the thinkers, the leaders who inspire you. They aren't takers. They're givers. They create not for applause, but for contribution. They give their light freely without demanding anything in return. Third, cultivate self-validation. This is the hardest and most essential step. Self-validation means looking in the mirror and saying, I see you. I value you. I accept you. It means being your own biggest fan, your own cheerleader, your own witness. Not in an arrogant, self-absorbed way, but in a way that recognizes your intrinsic worth. When you validate yourself, the world's opinion of you becomes secondary. You're no longer a slave to the whims of others. You're free. And finally, embrace solitude. Not as a punishment, but as a practice. Solitude is where you reconnect with yourself, where you strip away the layers of performance and rediscover your essence. It's where you find the courage to face your fears, your flaws, your truth. And in that truth, you realize that you don't need the spotlight to matter. You matter because you exist. Let's close with a thought experiment. Imagine your life as a canvas. For years, you've been painting it based on what others want to see. Their expectations, their opinions, their approval have guided your brush. But now the canvas is yours. What do you want to create? What colors, shapes, and stories will you paint when the audience is gone? Because that's where true freedom lies, not in the applause of the crowd, but in the art you create for yourself. So what will you choose? Will you keep chasing the shadows on the cave wall, or will you step into the light? Will you keep building sandcastles, or will you carve your mountain? The spotlight is a distraction. The fire is within you. And when you learn to burn for yourself, the world will notice. Not because you need it to, but because you've become the kind of person they can't look away from. Not because of the spotlight, but because of your own brilliant, undeniable light.